I'm going back to share screen. And now I'm going to start, and Casey, you can let everyone in.
I want to tell tales of a lesbian life. And I hope I'm wrong, but I think this life is coming to an end.
Our history was disappearing as quickly as we were making it.
This archive, it came out of a political movement. We are still in a political movement.
We were all so eager to combat lesbian invisibility that we took risks with what we recorded, and we took risks with what we left in the archive.
I came here initially because I wanted to learn about who I was, and I was the community. I wanted to see about my history and who was my foremother. You know, who am I supposed to become?
It was my family, the only family I ever had. I think harder than having it was saying goodbye to it. That was different.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. This is Sinister Wisdom's conversation with Megan Rossman, the director of the Archivettes, which I hope you all had the wonderful opportunity to see and enjoy in the week that we've had it up available for a special screening. My name is Julie Enzer, and I'll be hosting this evening's conversation. We have a chock-a-block hour planned for you, with plans, as usual, to wrap up no later than 8:05. In case you're not familiar with Sinister Wisdom, this is our brief advertisement for the work that we do. Sinister Wisdom is a quarterly journal of lesbian literature and art. Our current issue is Sinister Wisdom 118, 45 years, a tribute to the lesbian herstory archives. This wonderful issue was edited by Archivettes, members of the Lesbian Herstory Archives Coordinating Committee, and volunteers. Archivettes are, of course, the inspiration of our time together this evening with Megan Rossman and the film of that title. If you all are not a current subscriber to Sinister Wisdom, I encourage you to sign up for a subscription today by going to sinisterwisdom.org/subscribe. We'll also be putting all of these links into the chat. A group of monthly sustainers are vital to Sinister Wisdom, and this is our fall fundraising campaign. If you are able to give $3, $5, or maybe $100 a month to Sinister Wisdom, you can sign up to be a sustainer at sinisterwisdom.org/sustainers. I send out emails every month when your gift comes in with behind the scene details and new information about what we have coming in the journal, and also the best things that I have read over the past month. Presently, we are also shipping out the Sinister Wisdom 2021 calendar at a regular pace. Women are buying it and sending it as gifts. You can see a copy here and order a copy for $15 plus $4.20 for postage. The link is sinisterwisdom.org/calendar, and we'll put that in the contents. I have a few more announcements at the end of the program, including mentioning our badges, but I'll just hold those up briefly. But before we begin, a few housekeeping items. Please keep your microphone muted throughout the program. We will have an opportunity for questions and answers beginning around 7:40 or 7:45. And at that point, we'll let people speak on screen, and then at the end, as has become our practice, everyone will have the opportunity to unmute and wave and cheer and dance as we listen to our final song. I do encourage you to light up the chat on Zoom, put comments on Facebook if you are watching us there. We will monitor both of those, and if there are questions for Megan, I will raise those up as we go along and at the end. If you need technical assistance this evening, there are 3 people who can help you with that. They're all marked as co-hosts, so you should be able to see that. Juno Stilley, Casey Moore, and Shramona Mandel. They will help you with any technical issues you might be having. And so now on to our program. I'm thrilled to be here with Megan Rossman this evening. Megan's feature-length debut, The Archivettes, premiered at Outfest in 2019 and has screened as an official selection at over 35 film festivals. This is the reason why I thought everyone had seen it but me, and why I wanted to organize this event, because I was not at Outfest nor any of the 35 film festivals. The Hollywood Reporter called the documentary a warm tribute to second wave feminism. The Queer Review called it a gift to the future. The Archivettes explores the founding and development of the Lesbian Herstory Archives, and it has won jury prizes at Stamped Film Festival and the Fargo Moorhead LGBT Film Festival, and awards from the Princess Grace Foundation and Reeling Film Festival. Rossman's additional films, because she's not a one-hit wonder, have screened at festivals including Doc NYC and Newfest. Her film, Love Letter Rescue Squad, won Best Student Documentary in the Emerging Filmmakers Showcase at the Cannes Film Festival American Pavilion in 2017. Rossman has also worked as a multimedia journalist at The Washington Post and as director of video at Teach for America. In 2011, she won an Emmy for her video Unfinished Business, Earth Day 40 Years Later. In 2009, she collaborated on A Mother's Risk, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for International Reporting. Megan Rossman is currently an assistant professor and chair of communications at Purchase College, and I'm thrilled to have her with us this evening. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here and to continue this amazing celebration of the archives at 45 years.
I know, it's very exciting. I'm so thrilled that we've been able to do this issue and put this stuff together. So tell us all a bit about how you came to this project, The Archivettes.
Absolutely. So I used to live a couple blocks away from the Lesbian Herstory Archives. And I had a friend come visit me. They were looking at Google Maps, getting off the subway, and they were like, hey, what is this? And I thought, like, I'm a lesbian. I have no idea what this is. I was a little embarrassed, actually. And then I thought, well, let me reach out to them. And I had a good excuse because at the time I was applying to graduate school. And for a scholarship application, I had to make a film about an elderly LGBT activist. And so I wrote a note broadly to the Archivettes, and 2 women got back to me very quickly, Deb Adel, the co-founder, and then Maxine Wolf, who also has been involved with the archives for such a long time. And they were just so generous, you know, they immediately were like, you can interview us, sure, like, you know, we're happy to help. And I remember the first time I walked into the archives, I just felt like I was coming home, because I had never really thought about history beyond my like bloodline, my family. And so it just opened this whole huge window. It's like, oh, there are other lesbians from the Midwest who are filmmakers who walked through here. And I just felt this incredible connection and emotion. And honestly, it just kind of never stopped. So I did the scholarship. I didn't get the first scholarship, but I applied again the following year with a different film, also about the archives, and got it. So that was really lovely. And then I ended up just kind of filming as events came up. They marched at Brooklyn Pride, and I followed that. And then I had a class in graduate school where we just had freedom to do whatever we wanted. And I thought, oh, let me revisit this project about the archives. And honestly, when I made that, I, went back through some of the materials and just got more and more invested. And then when the film got out there into the world, it was the film Love Letter Rescue Squad that you mentioned. And I was like, oh, other people are really invested in this too. And that was this amazing connection of, I can, do this work and share the archives further with the world, and also have people excited to learn and try to support it. So that was kind of how all the filming got started. And then when I went to, finish my MFA, I had to do a thesis project. And I was like, I really want to make a feature-length documentary about the archives. And I went to Deb and, said, what do you think about this? And I think there was a lot of enthusiasm for the project. And then I was kind of off to the races.
That's fantastic. And tell us a bit about, I was trying to count elements that were coming together in the film. Obviously, lots of archival footage. And I was wondering, was that all from LHA? Did you source it from other places? How many interviews did you do? Lots of photographs that fixed into different parts of the montage. Will you tell us a bit about kind of what you brought together in the film and the scope of everything as you were putting it together?
Absolutely. So I think the way that I started navigating it was I sat down with Deb on that first day, and we made a list of like all the folks who had been like maybe more significant coordinators in her memory. And I just started kind of reaching out to people to check in, and not even to interview, but just to chat with them and hear about their experience and start this journey of learning more about them. And one other benefit, of course, is the archives itself. So as I'm reaching out to them, I'm also like scanning through people's special collections. And I remember when I did one interview, someone was like, I feel like you really know me and this is weird. And I was like, well, you left this amazing information for me to find. So that was sort of the initial approach. In terms of archival materials, I was really, really grateful and lucky because there were a few people that really documented the archives. So Morgan Gwenwald, who is an amazing photographer, I think some of her work is featured in the special issue, was incredibly supportive and allowed me to work with her to use a lot of the photos that she had shot. Saskia Scheffer also allowed me to use materials that she had shot. And that was on the photography side of things. Now on the video side, it was a little trickier because there was kind of just this collection that was in the archive of home movies. And I remember sitting there one day with a lot of the interns, because they have this amazing staff of interns in the summer. And I had went out and like bought all these snacks and we're eating Cool Ranch Doritos. And then we watched one of these home movies and there's like a young lesbian eating Cool Ranch Doritos. And we all kind of like jumped and laughed and thought like, okay, I guess nothing changes to some extent. But then I went about the process of figuring out like, okay, who put this in the archives collection and sort of backtracking. And there were a few people who had filmed more significantly. One of them is Polly Thistlethwaite. And I actually had already talked to Polly and she was incredible. She went back through her personal materials. It was a combination of some stuff was in the archives, some stuff was in her personal collection. And I just was, happy to digitize anything I could as we kind of track things down. So that was one sort of period more in the 90s of material. Giancarlo Musto, who also was in that time in the 90s, had filmed, I think, the archives opening day. And she really went through a lot actually to track down footage for me. She went to her like physical storage space and like went through materials. So that was incredibly, incredibly, incredibly supportive. And then a little bit earlier than that generation was Sarah Yeager and Manuela Suarez had both filmed some of the archives like at home events in the 80s and also were supportive. So I think honestly, I feel so grateful and lucky because once I started digging into the footage, I felt this like surge of, well, how can we help you and what can we track down? And even to the extent of, you might want to check in with this person to see if they would have, I remember someone filming on this day, and, so that was kind of that sort of process. But part of the archives is that it's not like the archives owns the material, the copyright holder owns the material. So I also had to go through the process of tracking things down and making sure that I had reached an agreement in terms of usage for the material, and that I was treating it, with sensitivity around that. So I know that was a lot of information. I don't know if that fully answered your question.
Yeah, no, that was great. And it was amazing to think about all of the material that was behind it that then gets compiled into that 1 hour riveting film that you've made. And Meredith, I see on the chat, also says it's amazing to think about how many stories are in the Lesbian Herstory archives. And I think we're always in the process of collecting more things in the archive, but also thinking about what stories we can tell from it. And before I get to my next question, I just wanted to also highlight, of course, Morgan Gwenwald and Saskia Sheffer were the photo editors for Sinister Wisdom 118, the issue that we've just published. How was it your plan always to have the film be an hour and not 90 minutes? What was did the material dictate that, or what was your thinking about that?
That's a great question. I think when I set out to make a feature, I thought probably the more concise I can make it, the better. And then there was this idea of like how it would translate to public media and use in the classroom. And so that's kind of how we landed around the 1 hour time marker. But I do think when someone tells you they want it to be longer, that's like always a good sign. So I'm totally pleased if someone says, oh, I wish it was 90 minutes. I'm like, okay, great. Like, there's more work to be done about the archives. But one other experience I had was I actually did reach out to different potential distributors and just talk to them and see like, okay, what else exists on this topic? Like in terms of length, what are we aiming for? And that also helped me arrive at that hour-long time restriction.
Right. And Women Make Movies is the exclusive US distributor, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah,
They are.
Yeah, and they arranged the showing that we did. So one thing that I was really struck while watching the film is the commitment of the volunteers, of the coordinating committee, of everyone involved with the Lesbian Herstory Archives to a real politic of egalitarianism. And I think sort of linked but slightly different is also challenging hierarchies. They talk about challenging hierarchies in how archives are organized, in how information is organized, and also in challenging hierarchies in how they do their work together. And so you brought that out as something to highlight in the film. And I was curious, did their commitments influence the making of the film as it was unfolding for you?
Oh, most definitely. I think there are sort of two areas. The making of the film, but I honestly think working on this kind of changed the way that I saw the world. And I remember when I started graduate school, I had a professor that was like, well, the personal is political. And I was like, well, I'm not really a political, I was a journalist. And like, it's just comical now to think about that because now I'm so political. And the archives helped me understand like the role that we all play in changing that system. So that's one thing, is that it really shaped my view. And then the other thing that's so interesting to me is, as a journalist, you're really not supposed to like allow the people that you're reporting on to participate with you in the work. It's kind of frowned upon and, can be considered unethical. But when I went into this project, knowing, just the structure of the archives and the generosity and everything that happened, I knew that I wanted to do an in-progress screening for the Archivettes. And I didn't tell my advisor because I'm sure she would have told me, no, you're not allowed to do that. That is definitely like not how it goes. But I have to tell you, the film got so much better from doing that it really shifted a lot of how I think about things. So I think I had framed it around having like a rough cut. Like I literally had just gotten back from Australia from interviewing Joan Nessel, who, by the way, I showed up on her doorstep and, she acted like she had known me her whole life. It was, there's just so much kindness involved in this process. But within that, I just quickly assembled that part of it and was like, I need to show them the rough cut. I think it was in early December. I was like, I got to get this in before people leave for the holidays. And I had hoped that the initial reaction would be like joyous and celebratory, and it wasn't. But I slowly got notes from people. So I think it was like people had that initial moment of there were maybe like a few factual things to check on, which was of course an important part of showing it to them. But then I would get these like really long, thoughtful emails from people saying things like, you might want to think about, this time period, this person might have material that would relate to this theme that you're talking about. Or like one thing that really was missing from me was like that how they work as a coordinating committee. So I'm so glad that that came through, because I think in the rough cut that wasn't really focused on so much. So that shifted my process and ultimately I think made the film a lot stronger. Of course, you can't please everyone. I'm sure there are people that would still have things that they wish I had done differently or included, or however different it would be, I still really valued their feedback. And again, it changed the way that I would think about making a film in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the really striking things too about researching at the archives is the awareness that you're researching a story that you want to tell as a researcher or a scholar, but you're also aware that the people who are involved in bringing the archive to you have their own story about what that archive is. And that's, for me, unlike a lot of the other archives that I've been at, where there are professional staff, trained librarians, this is not to say that the LHA staff is not professional. They're incredibly professional, but there's a personal investment in those stories that isn't at some of the other archives. So can you tell us one or two things that you feel like they really deepened and improved from that experience?
Yeah, I think that one thing was definitely that idea of the structure of the archives and how important it was that everyone's voice was equal, and getting into that. But I think another thing was in the rough cut, I didn't have the archives opening as such like a major turning point in the film. And so I was able to go back and, think about that part of it and why that physical space was so important to the community, and make sure that I was like finding a way visually to show that. And then thankfully, like that led me to the footage of the opening day. And I was able to really focus on that a lot more as a result of that. I think there were, of course, there were other small things, small considerations, but overall, those were the more major changes that we went through after that point.
That's great. And while I was watching it, I was remembering what because I wasn't in New York, I was living in Michigan when they were fundraising for it, but the kind of awareness, and I'm sure people who are with us this evening remember that campaign to buy the building much more and the fundraising with it, and then the joy of it opening, right, it was a Stonewall anniversary celebration, I think, that they did the opening. And I guess it would have been, I'm trying to do the math in my head, maybe 25 years. It was 93, 94 that it was opening up. And it was a big community milestone. So it was lovely to see that in the film. Another key element of the film that I just would love to hear you talk a little bit more about, because I think it's a part of the film, but also a part of this moment in lesbian feminism, is generational transfer. How do we tell stories that are inspiring to new generations of activists? How do we tell stories that both pay tribute to people who have done important work and also create space and openings for people to do new and different type of work, and hold all of those complexities together? So I wonder if you could, if you have some reflections on that from the filmmaking and your involvement with the archives.
I definitely had not had intergenerational connection with the LGBT community before making this film too. So like that's another benefit for me is now I have this incredible extended family. And we think about that term, like when I was coming out, I understood that family like was a term for other gay people, but I guess I didn't really understand why or what that meant. But like, you know, once I worked with the archives, I got it, you know, so clearly. But they are so good at, I think from day one, right? Because even when they were founding the archives, Mabel Hampton was there. And they've always just had this incredible group of people of different ages involved all the time. And it might, you know, vary some depending on year to year, but they think about that transfer of knowledge. And I feel like that's got to be, you know, part of the cornerstone of the lesbian history archives, because it's just so vital and so vibrant. You know, it's easy every time you go to an event at the archives and at home event, you see people of different ages, right? So I think I really wanted that to come to life in the film. And I think the other piece that the archives is looking at or dealing with that I wanted to try to communicate is this the transition of power, as you referenced, because you know, Deb had her 76th birthday, and Joan, I believe, turned 80. And, you know, a lot of the women who founded this are going to have to retire at some point or have started to pull back. And the question is like, who's going to take over? What is that going to look like? And I think that that's always something they're grappling with. But one of the most interesting things to me was seeing like this idea that the interns come in and then they get involved and they stay around. And it's like a constant thing that they're always recruiting new people, not just to do that work for the internship, but that come on and end up staying on board and having these long-term connections. So like Colette Montoya Sloan, who's in the film, she started as an intern, and it's been at least 10 years that she's been involved with the archives now. But that's a good example. And I believe Sean also got involved maybe through a class that was being taught when she was a student, but I know she's had some longevity even as a young person involved in the archives. And I think honestly too, like, it's just so important for our community that we know who came before us and the work that was done, especially right now. We're in this crazy political time. I'm sure we're all quite anxious about the upcoming election, and just having that faith to see, okay, here are the women that came before me. Here's what they've survived. Here's what they've, you know, been through. It gives you strength to continue moving forward and thinking about how there could be positivity in the future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's great. And of course, I want to mention that Sean Smith Cruz is one of the co-editors of this issue of Sinister Wisdom. And I'm going to make a bunch of announcements because people are emailing me privately, and I'm trying to like keep up with that. But if Shimona or Juno or Casey would put into the chat the link to view the film and the password for the film, because folks are asking for that. The film is, I believe, scheduled to be up through midnight tonight for folks who haven't seen it yet. And so for folks asking about that in the chat, they're going to have to look for a minute, but it's in a Sinister Wisdom email, and it's also for anybody who has access to Facebook on the page of the Facebook event for this evening. I'm looking at my list here. Oh, so that's the film. People can still watch it and share it with folks. The video, somebody asked, the video from this evening will be available. The video from this evening will be available on our YouTube channel and on Facebook when I process it, which will most likely be tomorrow after 11 o'clock, because I have some errands in the morning. My dog has to go to the spa. The Facebook feed was down, but I believe that it is up. So if you are watching, if you're while I'm making these announcements, if you want to cruise over to Facebook, you can let Casey or Shimona or Juno know if the Facebook feed doesn't seem to be working again. And I also wanted to take this moment to say that Joan Nessel did turn 80 this year in May, and we are doing a special celebration of her in conversation with Cheryl Clark on Tuesday, November 10th. We will be on Zoom for that. That will also go on Facebook. And that's going to be just a really fantastic special evening. So I encourage people to put that on their calendar. So that's our little announcement break here, Megan. And I see the film link is up, and it is available until tomorrow night, Wednesday, the 28th at midnight. So thank you for getting that up. So Megan, tell us something, one or two things that surprised you in making this film. We especially like if you have some pithy surprises that might be sexy too.
Ooh, I mean, there's always like this running joke about Joan's bedroom and like how many people have, got back there, and the archives sort of overtook her apartment. But then that led me to think about actually something else, which I didn't end up including in the film. There was a coordinator at the archives who I guess really enjoyed being topless. And for her 30th birthday, they had a surprise party where she walked in and everyone was topless, or I guess most everyone who was comfortable was topless. So I'm just like scanning through these home movies, eating my Cold Ranch Doritos, and I pop this in and we are dying. It is amazing. The footage is incredible. It is just so joyous and like silly. And like you said, just incredible, right? Ultimately, the person who was, main celebration it was fine with me using the footage, but then after talking to several people, I just worried that it could be hurtful. And I remember Polly Thistlewaite, who was living at the archives at the time of this party, was like, I wish that you had found this like just a little bit later, like 10 more years, and then everyone would have been retired and it wouldn't have been, as much of a concern to be out there in the world. But I think that was the kind of spirit that the archives had, that they would have this like fun, quiet, topless party to celebrate someone's birthday. So I loved finding that kind of footage.
When you first said, I just have to say, when you first said that about Polly, I thought, wow, Polly had a lot of faith in like a revolution in the world, that we would all be fine with more nudity in 10 years. But no, maybe it was people's concern about their jobs. But you were going to— I think
that was it. Yeah.
You were going to share another surprising thing.
Well, I was just going to say that the material you find in the archives can be surprising. So I think one of the more amazing moments I had is I learned about Marge McDonald, whose diaries are in the archive. And, we talk about her a bit in the film, but she grew up in Ohio. And so that was striking to me because I also grew up in Ohio. And it was really interesting to read these diaries about her like having to go on these terrible dates with men. And she was like interested in the woman who she was like double dating with, right? And so that was some of the stuff that I found that was maybe just surprising, because I was like, oh, this could have been, someone in my family. This could have been my next door neighbor. It could have been someone that I was interacting with all the time, having these like very quiet, private thoughts that I never would have come across if they hadn't left their materials in the archive.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And what was the hardest thing about making the film?
The hardest thing, I think two things. One is just the labor of love and the timing, and trying to figure out like it can be so overwhelming of like this entire archive, and I'm trying to condense it and get this 1 hour piece out of it, and just figuring out like how to navigate all of that is really tough. I think financing is always a challenge, and figuring out how you're just gonna make it work and kind of get to the finish line. But to be honest with you, it is one of the least challenging projects in terms of logistics, because I just felt so supported by the larger community that I could show up on someone's doorstep who had been involved in the archives 20 years prior, and they were happy to like have me in and make tea and talk to me and share, whatever information that I wanted to know. So I think in that aspect, it was more just like the logistical challenges of making a film as opposed to making a film about this.
Mm-hmm. And you alluded to it. Films, as we all know, cost money to make, right? And I think this is, in spite of its many awards and accolades, probably not one that's bringing down what my younger sister would say, big bank,
Yes.
and the box office. So I'm always invested in making visible money and financial arrangements. So I'm going to ask you directly, how much did it cost to make the Archivettes? And how did you raise the money and put together the financial package to make the film possible?
Sure. So on paper, our budget was like $150,000, which for a feature-length documentary is like nothing. Like if I applied to certain grants, they would have laughed at me and been like, "You're completely underestimating everything. There is no way that you could get this done for that price." But most of that was actually something we call in film like in kind. So that means I had a lot of people work for free on the film, and I'm working for free on their films. So I think I'm almost at the point now where we have evened out our debts, but that's pretty common, especially within the documentary industry. In terms of costs, so I didn't pay myself. That was huge, and I'm getting close. I think, knock on wood, at the end of this year or perhaps early next year, I might get to the point where I will have paid myself back for the money that I put into the film. So I'm not too distantly far away from that, which is great. In terms of funding, I always try to make films that I don't need a lot of money to make because, again, anyone who's done that kind of work knows that you can just spend years fundraising and then never actually be able to get any of the work done. But the funding that I got was from the Princess Grace Foundation. And Grace Kelly, when she died, her family started this foundation in her name, and they support specifically like students, graduate and undergraduate students pursuing certain kinds of projects in film and dance and theater. And so I was nominated by my graduate program and ended up winning this grant of $30,000, which is pretty much what I used when it actually came time to need, money to pay people. And I tried to pay everyone that worked on the film in kind, at least like a little bit of something. But I would say most of the funding then went to, I wanted to pay everyone who home videos or photos, not a lot of money, but at least, something to compensate them for all of their time. And then post-production is really huge for film. So, hiring a composer and a sound editor and correcting the color and all of that wonderful stuff. I edited it myself, but the high-end post-production was not something that I was skilled to do. And I should also mention, everyone who worked on the film identifies either as female or gender nonconforming. And that was really important to me too, that knowing that women are so underrepresented in the film industry and just knowing the kind of care that I wanted the material to be treated with, that we go in that direction. And I think it was a really amazing experience.
That's great. That's great. I've already had someone send a question. I have one more question, and then we are going to open it up. I'll take questions from the chat, and or if people want to ask questions themselves, you can send me a message or put in the chat, and we will find you and unmute you in just a few minutes. But before I get to the audience questions, I want to ask, in part, because I've seen a little preview of a new thing that you're working on, but if you talk with us a little bit about what's next and what you're thinking about.
Sure. So I made a short film about Naomi Raplansky, who's this incredible lesbian poet, and had work published also in this edition. And that's at film festivals right now alongside the Archivettes. And then the next project I'm working on is about Miss Mabel Hampton. And even though Miss Hampton is mentioned in the Archivettes, when I finished the project, I realized that she really didn't get the time and space that she deserved, and just what an incredible woman she was. And I also remember so clearly, learning of the story. I think it was Polly who told me the story about Mabel's obituary and how it was just, the way it was written. It was in the New York Times saying that Mabel Hampton has no survivors, and them all just being, what are you talking about? Like, Mabel Hampton helped build this incredible archive, and there are tons of survivors, and this is not at all how we imagine things. So I have just started working on that, and I have some wonderful students who I work with at Purchase who recently graduated that are very excited to learn about a Miss Hampton story. And I think that's part of it too, is just continuing to like pass down to different people and expose all of these incredible women that have done this work and had, you know, amazing lives that just haven't been covered enough.
That's when you talked about Mabel Hampton's obituary, it almost made me tear up, in part because a dear friend of mine and collaborator, Tim Retzloff, is here this evening, and he runs a website that aggregates obituaries of LGBT people in Michigan who passed away, and sort of making their lives visible, and does this amazing archival research about finding ordinary people through their obituaries. And so, Tim, I hope you'll put the link in the chat so people can check it out. And if they know of people who haven't been recognized through obituaries, that they might connect with you if there's a Michigan connection. So I have two questions, Megan. That first one will start, one person says, the cinematography is gorgeous. Did you use film, or was it recorded digitally? And what was the technology behind making such a beautiful film?
Oh, well, thank you. I'm so glad to hear you thought the cinematography was beautiful, especially because we're watching it on these little screens and not like in a, you know, beautiful movie theater.
Right.
So I used a Canon C100 and just shot, you know, what we would call like 2K, because now people are moving on to 4K. But essentially, I was trained as a photojournalist, and as Julie mentioned at the beginning, I worked at the Washington Post, and that's kind of how I think about filmmaking. I had an editor who was very influential. His name was Michael, and he used to tell me every frame of a video should be as beautiful as a photograph would be. And so, you know, Michael Duciel, he stuck with me. He has since passed away, but I often think about how important it is to make everything visually as beautiful as we can. And, you know, film is so costly to work with. Unfortunately, I think that it's kind of a rarity unless you're able to do experimental, or you're working in some, you know, more sort of obscure situation where you're not filming as much.
Mm-hmm. I never thought of every still being beautiful. That's a wonderful image. Someone else asks, what material might you have about those folks who use the archives? Scholars, artists, historians?
So I did have a period where I was trying to figure out, like, okay, should these people be involved, and how can I tell their stories? Because you also just, all you have to do is sit at the archives for a weekend, and you will see the huge variety of people that come in. There were people from Germany and Israel. And I remember one of the first days that I filmed, Deb Adel gave a tour to these two women. I'm trying to remember if they were from France. They were from somewhere in Europe. And they literally were asking her, you know, does the archives take anything? And she had this line saying, well, we, you know, you could send us your dirty socks if you wanted to, but we would hope that you would not do that. We hope that, unless you thought they were really important, you know, to be remembered. And they ended up blogging about the experience and, you know, posting it. But I did really consider the different angles. And I think that the amount of people that visit the archives and use it as a resource is just so vast that side of things was challenging. And then in addition to me, just to help narrow the focus, I tried to focus more on the people that were there when the archive started and kind of kept it running. But I do have tons of footage of people visiting the archives and, you know, talked with them about different experiences. There was also a PhD student, I'm forgetting Jay's last name, but they were there like all summer working on something, and I was filming heavily, and you know, they were super helpful and would help me move tables and stuff. So I think that there's just always that spirit of people coming through and using the archive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a beautiful space. A reminder to everybody listening, we are taking questions. If you want to ask directly of Megan herself, just let me know and we will unmute you, or you can put them in the chat and I'm scanning that and we'll raise them up. I was thinking, and because we put these up on YouTube afterwards, I didn't take the clip, but one of my favorite movies to teach is Cheryl Dunye's Watermelon Woman, right? Which is about archives and has this iconic moment from the Lesbian Herstory archives with Sarah Schulman as an archivette just dumping this box of stuff for Dunye as a researcher. Did you see that? Were you familiar with that before you kind of entered the world of the LHA, or is that only me and my generation that's particularly moved by that memory?
No, I think that film continues on. And I think also that was the first time that the archives, maybe the first and last time the archives had allowed like a more narrative kind of project to use the space there. So it definitely does have significance. And I think, you know, wasn't there just a major anniversary for the film like last year or the year before as well? So I think it does continue to have that legacy.
Yeah. Yeah. So Natalia asks, first she says, thanks so much for sharing your wonderful work. I'm curious to hear if you've been in conversation with lesbian archives in other parts of the world. There's a wonderful lesbian feminist archive in Mexico City, El Archivo Histórico de Lesbianas Feministas, created by movement founder Jan Maria. I was doing really well until I reached the last name, and it is in the chat and I cannot pronounce it. It's an indigenous name more than a Spanish name. So do you thoughts about Natalia's question in conversation with lesbian archives in other parts of the world?
Well, first of all, thank you, Natalia. I think before COVID, I know we all have our like pre-COVID and post-COVID lives that we're living. I was traveling with the film, and that's when I really became aware of how many different lesbian archives exist in the world, right? Because I would land in Ireland and would have a Q&A at a film festival, and film festivals are really good about making community connections. And so someone would show up from like a local archive, or I was in Chicago, or I was in LA and the Mazer archive was there. And so I started learning about a lot of these different places. I have, of course, like a lot of interest in visiting, but I haven't been able to. I hope that, you know, in our post-COVID lives, we'll be able to get back there. But I think the most interesting thing that I learned is that there are actually a lot of really small archives. So, for example, Cincinnati has a lesbian archive, and I had no idea that that existed, but had like a lovely email exchange with the folks that run it, in hopes that I'll be able to, you know, get the film into a festival there, and then be able to work with them, you know, to do some sort of like local event and tour. I had a lot of fun when I went to the Mazer archive, and I think Angela is the name of the communication director, but she gave me an amazing tour, and like totally, I was having fun, like looking at all the lesbian softball uniforms and just thinking about how different the collections are, even like East Coast, West Coast, how different that was, and the types of things that lesbians did together, let alone if you start looking at more international archives. So I think that it's really cool that it exists. I wish there was some like, you know, quick depository of seeing like, here are the lesbian archives in every state, and here are the ones all over the world, and, you know, be able to access that more quickly. But I definitely am learning as we go.
That's great. I'm writing that down. Juno, Shramona. Well, Shramona's almost done with her internship with Sinister Wisdom and has a big project, but Juno's just getting started. Maybe we should make a list of all of the lesbian archives in every state and country.
That would be awesome. I would love, and I could try to help too if you want.
That would be awesome. I may rope you and others into that project. Just want to note that we are recording this event. It will go up on YouTube and Facebook and on the Sinister Wisdom page for the issue of the journal that we're celebrating, sinisterwisdom.org/SW1818. That's SW118, since I tripped on saying that. And the video will go up at some point, likely tomorrow. let's see, what haven't I asked? What great story do you want to tell us, Megan, that I haven't gotten? What was your best moment from touring with it? Tell us about the pre-COVID times. Remind us of what it was like when we could move about the world. What was your
I
best viewing story?
I think the coolest thing was that when I did the sort of release side of the film, I was in touch with so many people that I like thought I would never get to meet. But then as I started touring with the film, I would get in touch with them and be able to connect. So one of the coolest experiences I can think of is Sarah Yeager, who filmed some of that archival sort of at home footage, is at Carefree Lesbian Community in Florida. And Carefree brought me down, I think in February, not long before all of this started, to do a screening. And I got to hang out with Sarah. And it was like we had had all these email conversations back and forth. But, you know, there she was in front of me, and it felt almost surreal to get to connect with some of these people in person and see, you know, what their experience of the film was like, and, you know, being there with them when they watch it and seeing how everything came together. That was really, really amazing. And then I think the other screening beyond the New York screening, which of course was special because the Archives is home in New York, that I think of is we did something called the Fringe Film Festival in London, and Polly Thistlethwaite came out for that. And we just had so much fun because it was the first screening that I had been to where it was all young people. Like, it wasn't about connecting with the archives because you knew about the archives, right? Which is also very unique. But it was because people so genuinely were interested in it, and it had sold out, and it was at like a community space and people were sitting on the ground. It was just this really warm feeling that also reminded me, like, this was what it was like when the archive started. You know, this was this grassroots thing. People were just trying to find the information, communicate with each other. And so that was the screening where those two things came together and met for me.
Oh, that's so lovely. I hope that we are all able to, well, Zoom has provided us so many lovely opportunities like this evening. I hope there is a time when we will be able to gather together again in person. Let's see, one other just appreciation from Jean and Artie in Melbourne, Australia, where they're involved in the Victoria Women's, I don't know if it's Victorian or Victoria Women's Liberation and Lesbian Feminist Archives, and they appreciate your film and are enjoying the conversational chat. And also Tim Retzloff notes that the diverse sexuality and gender section of the Society of American Archivists has a project called Lavender Legacies of LGBTQ Archives. And I will copy that link and try and post it to everyone. Posting that link right now. So I think we're coming to the top of the hour, and as everyone knows, I'm always committed to wrapping things up. Megan, it's been so much fun. For everyone who's been here this evening, this is our first time ever doing a video, making a film available and having a conversation with a filmmaker. So if you like it, let me know, and if we should try and repeat it. I want to make a few announcements while Sharmona gets our final song teed up, because we have lots of great things coming up for Sinister Wisdom. As I mentioned earlier, Tuesday, November 10th at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, we will feature Joan Nessel in conversation with Cheryl Clark. It's going to be an amazing event, and I invite you to RSVP on Facebook or to let me know of your intentions of coming so I can make sure we have enough space in the Zoom meeting. Our next writing workshop, which Casey Moore is the organizer of, and people have been having a fantastic time with these writing workshops, is going to be on Saturday, December 5th. It's called Appropriately Pinpointing the Visual in Writing for the Stage and Screen, and will be led by another filmmaker, Alexis Clements. That's Saturday, December 5th at noon, limited to 12 participants. On Tuesday, December 8th, we have our open mic reading, and we'll have information about signing up for that. And on Tuesday, December 15th, we have the second Sinister Wisdom Book Club meeting to discuss Shani Mutu's Polar author Vortex, a fabulous new novel that's out. The January issue of Sinister Wisdom is already at the printer. Subscribe to our email newsletter for the cover reveal in December and for events in conjunction with that issue. You can follow Sinister Wisdom on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram so you don't miss a single fun thing happening in our world. So now we're going to unspotlight Megan. Everyone should be able to click on gallery view in order to see everyone on this call. I invite you to start your video and have everybody scroll through and see the gorgeous faces of women gathered here this evening. We're going to play our final song, which is L Word, written by Carol Kramer and performed by your girlfriend. We thank your girlfriend for sharing the music and hope that you love it. As we play the song, I encourage everyone to wave, say hi, talk in the chat. We'll listen to the full song, and then when it's over, I will be ending the Zoom call. Take the magic on with you, make friends with people, Zoom, and have fun. Thank you so much for joining us this evening and for being part of Sinister Wisdom. Shimona.
Did you look around?
Thank you all. It's been a pleasure. We will see you at our next event.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Beautiful. Wonderful.